For our first session, The Poetic Imagination, Ashok Vajpayee in conversation with Manju Walkley and Neeta Gupta. To introduce our speakers, Manju Walkley is a social entrepreneur with a diverse background in literature, mass communication, psychology, biodiversity, conservation, and management. And we have Neeta Gupta, who's a publisher of Yatra books and works across languages and culture. Manju will introduce our poet, who will express and tell us why he chooses poetry as a medium to express himself and the future of poetry in an increasingly impatient world. I welcome Manju, Neeta, and Ashok.
Hello and good morning everybody to this session, The Poet's Imagination. In fact, this morning I was just telling Ashokji, it's one of those misty, beautiful mornings that poets must love. And it's the kind of mornings we all hope to see in Thimphu. And we're fortunate with this lovely rainfall this morning. We have these wonderful poets here with us. Ashokji, of course, is a very well-established Hindi poet from Delhi, and he's not just a poet, he's a translator, he's an editor, he's a promoter of the arts, crafts. I mean, there's dance, theatre, music. I mean, he's been associated with so many diverse fields, and he's also been a former civil servant. So it's wonderful to have you here, Ashokji. And we have a young poet here from Thimphu, Manju Walkley, who, as we were just told, is a traveler. She's apparently done road journeys by herself, 45 days running, living in a car. It's amazing. So we hope to hear some of her beautiful poems too. And I think we will all be comfortable if we speak both in Hindi and English. I think that's okay with everyone. So अशोक जी, मैं आपसे शुरू करती हूँ. आपने कहीं लिखा था, मैंने पढ़ा है कि बिना जीवन के कविता संभव नहीं. तो जाहिर है बिना कल्पना या इमेजिनेशन के भी कविता का होना मुश्किल है. So how does a poet, how does he walk this slippery path between real life and poetry and imagination on the other side? You know, this whole every poet creates his own parallel universe. And how does, it work at the conscious level? The imagination का क्या काम है, क्या role होता है, आप हमें बताएं.
If I asked a question which would take me about the whole forenoon, but let me say that the poetry is really born out of a love and lure of the world. Anybody who does not love the world, or anybody who is not lured by the world, cannot be a poet. So it's really born out of that love. And secondly, for a poet, the line between the so-called reality and imagination is very thin. He who has a very clear notion what reality is and a very clear notion of imagination is also unlikely to be a poet. A poet is one who imagines reality and therefore bridges the gap between the two. And for me, as a poet, I believe that nothing is true which has not been dreamt before.
Manju, would you like to tell us something about what imagination means to you as a poet? I mean, what is the role that imagination plays?
For me, I would think that there is no poetry without imagination, because poetry itself is an imagined piece of work. It is a form that is much different from essays or novels or plays. but without imagination, I don't think there would be any poetry.
Thank you. And Ashok ji, you also mentioned beauty and love, and in fact, you write poems on beauty and love. Are these imaginary too?
Well, in a certain sense, beauty is a construct of imagination. In the sense that what one particular person may think beautiful may not appear beautiful to another person. And you have these legends in which some very ugly looking woman had a great lover. So the lover's notion of beauty was quite different from what the normal populace must have thought of in the first place. Secondly, actually imagination plays a great role in our daily life also. A lot many things we do because we imagine that this will be happening. This is a misty morning, and we are imagining that hopefully the mist will last through the day and keep the day cool and not the sun which comes out rather harshly here. So, in a manner of speaking, and imagination has this other image making. You know, imagination has this meaning as well. We constantly make images and unmake them. I mean, there are images which become kind of racial images. The Buddha's image is an image, and nobody knows whether Buddha really looked like that or whatever. It's an act of imagination which then becomes so real that it's more real than reality. I mean, it doesn't really matter. In our case, the great epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata are actually epics of imagination. Nobody knows whether this actually happened, but they are more real than the so-called historical fact. And poetry has a running battle with history, in the sense that all too often poetry can be said to be the other history. In fact, literature itself can be said to be the other history. What history fails to notice, poetry may sometimes notice and regard.
Archive,
Yeah.
And there's one more thing about imagination. It's a very powerful thing, and as you said, we just construct our lives around what we imagine. So does it also have a destructive? Does it also have a destructive side?
Of course.
And would you like to talk about this?
Well,
frightening,
there have been great acts of imagination which have ended in great disasters. There was somebody who dreamt of a society which will be equal, which will be democratic, which will have no exploitation. Now, this was a great act of imagination, to imagine that such a society is possible. And they experimented for 70 years and landed up in huge disaster. So an act of imagination, you can't find fault with that act of imagination, results in this. Many religions, the religious bigotry and the intolerance is not ordained by the original imagination. One of the qualities of imagination is to pay constant tribute to the plurality of existence, to the plurality of the world. And that plurality gets undermined when the imagination tends to push it in one direction to the exclusion. You know, imagination is under no obligation to give up plurality. Other systems may be, but imagination, in a manner of speaking, is chaotic. It is, well, sometimes I say, writers have nothing to do with truth, because truth is dictatorial. It wants perfection. It does not admit of contradictions and things of that kind. Truth is there as a dictator. But reality is more chaotic, more democratic, more plural, full of contradictions, tensions, this, that, and the other. Now, if they disappear, either from reality or from literature, both will be so uninteresting.
Absolutely. So on this note, why don't we have some of your poems read out? You know, some of your poems on love, on beauty. No, we have enough time. There's nobody here with any. We have
When I was a young student, I had a textbook in Hindi called Yadi Ye Bol Pate. It contained essays and poems by those who would normally not speak. For instance, Taj Mahal speaks, the Himalayas speak, a river speaks. So I got this notion fixed in my mind as a young boy that one of the jobs of poetry is to make those speak who not normally speak, at least not in the human tongues that we know. So this is the poem of that ilk. चिड़िया की प्रार्थना। न मेरा ना कोई ईश्वर है, ना देवालय, ना कोई अनंत, मैं तो इन सब पर चहकती फुदकती हूँ। मेरे लिए काल अन्न का एक दाना है जिसे मैं प्रसन्न होकर चुकती हूँ। मुझे पता है कि मैं थोड़ी देर के लिए हूँ, इसलिए मुझे कई बार बहुत देर तक बने रहने के जतन समझ में नहीं आते। मैं तो किसी और से नहीं, अपने से ही चाहती हूँ कि एक दिन उड़ूं और उड़ते उड़ते हमेशा के लिए ओझल हो जाऊं उस आकाश में जहाँ सूर्य के बगल में बैठकर तापा जा सकता है और देवता पहेलियों की तरह ताक नहीं लगाते। चिड़िया कहा था कि मैं हिंदी में कुख्यात प्रेम कवि हूँ। हाँ, मतलब अब लोगों ने प्रेम कविता लिखना बंद कर दिया, दुनिया भर की और चीज़ों की कविता लिखते रहते हैं। बहुत सारी समाज में क्या हो रहा है, ये हो रहा है, वो हो रहा है, तो वो सब जो कि दूसरे लोग ये कर ही रहे हैं, मैंने सोचा कि मैं थोड़ा और करता हूँ। Here is the poem called आओ। आओ जैसे अंधेरा आता है अंधेरे के पास, जैसे जल मिलता है जल में, जैसे रोशनी घुलती है रोशनी में। मुझे पहनो जैसे वृक्ष पहनता है छाल को, जैसे पगडंडी पहनती है हरी घास को। मुझे लो जैसे अंधेरा लेता है जड़ों को, जैसे पानी लेता है चंद्रमा को, जैसे अनंत लेता है समय को।
बहुत खूब, बहुत खूब। I think we can have this one read out again because this is one of your most beautiful poems.
आओ।
Do we have the translation?
Yeah.
No, but I think if he just reads it out once more.
Anyway,
I think let's have the translation and then we read it in beautiful.
okay, that's good. Since you told me you don't have to read.
And we never prepared.
Come as darkness comes to darkness, as water meets water, as light dissolves in light. Come, put me on, as the tree wears the bark, as the pathway wears the green grass. Take me, as darkness takes the roots, as water takes the moon, as eternity takes time.
Beautiful. And now we want the Hindi once more. Ek baar aur.
We have an indulgent interlocutor, and she is sort of imposing her taste on you. I can't help it.
But I'm sure everybody's enjoying it.
See, I never understood why I'm a man in such great hurry. You know, my entire poetics is poetics of hurry. Sort of that the moment will pass, or she will go away, and things like that. आओ आओ जैसे अंधेरा आता है अंधेरे के पास, जैसे जल मिलता है जल से, जैसे रोशनी घुलती है रोशनी में। आओ मुझे पहनो जैसे वृक्ष पहनता है छाल को, जैसे पगडंडी पहनती है हरी घास को। मुझे लो जैसे अंधेरा लेता है जड़ों को, जैसे पानी लेता है चंद्रमा को, जैसे अनंत लेता है समय को।
बहुत ओपन माइक में तो आप पढ़ेंगे ही, बट यहाँ हमारे ऑडियंसेस के लिए.
I have a grandson who's now, of course, 15-year-old. But when he was 2-year-old, when he was born, I wrote a poem for him. Then there was this Kargil war, if you remember. So I wrote a war song for him when he was only 6 months old. And then when he became 2-year-old, I wrote a prayer for him. I don't have a translation, but you'll get the hang of it anyway. Who said? T.S. Eliot said famously, poetry communicates before it is understood. Hopefully, that will help. अपने पोते की दूसरी वर्षगांठ पर एक प्रार्थना. 60 बरस का हो जाने के बावजूद, now I am of course 74 at that time.
You don't look it.
Well, 60 बरस का हो जाने के बावजूद मुझे एक भी पूरी प्रार्थना याद नहीं है. अपने पिता को मैंने प्रार्थना करते कभी नहीं देखा था. मेरी माँ ने मुझे कोई प्रार्थना नहीं सिखाई. मैंने बहुत कुछ गंवा दिया है, पर प्रार्थना नहीं, क्योंकि कोई भी पूरी कभी मेरे हिस्से में नहीं आई. तुम एक तुतलाता हुआ वाक्य हो जिसके इर्द गिर्द मैं एक प्रार्थना बुनना चाहता हूं. मैं उसमें गर्माती धूप, हरी पत्तियों का भय, पक्षियों का अथक उत्साह, खिलौनों की दिव्य आभा, बर्तनों में अन्न की आहट, सपनों से भारी नींद, आकाश में दिग्भ्रमित नक्षत्रों, साथ देने वाले हाथों, दिलासा देने वाली आंखों और न थकने हारने वाले पांवों को गूंथ देना चाहता हूं. मैं तुम्हारे लिए अभय की नहीं, अदम्य की कामना करता हूं. मैं नहीं चाहता कि तुम्हें कुछ उपहार या वरदान की तरह मिले. मैं जानता हूं कि तुम्हारे बड़े होने पर ये संसार लगभग वैसा ही गड्ढमड्ढ और झिलमिल होगा जैसा कि बुढ़ाते समय मेरे लिए है. मैं तुम्हें अंधेरे से लड़ने के लिए न कोई मशाल दे सकता हूँ, न उसे टोहने के लिए कोई लाठी. मैं इतना भर चाह सकता हूँ कि देर सवेर तुम अपनी आग पालो, जिसमें लपक और रोशनी हो, और जिसे लड़ भिड़ कर अंत तक किसी तरह बचाए रख सको. सपने और सच में अंतर करना मेरे लिए हमेशा कठिन रहा है. शायद ये भेद तुम जिंदगी में जल्दी कर पाओ, पर चाहता मैं यही हूं कि शुरू को आखिर तक ले जाने वाली डोर सपने की ही हो, भले सच में बिंधी हुई. हम सपने के परिवार के हैं, सच की बिरादरी के नहीं. ये मेरी उलझन नहीं, जिम्मेदारी है कि मैं विरासत में तुम्हें देवता नहीं पुरखे सौंपूं. मैं तुम्हें बताऊं, अंततः हम हारते रहे हैं, और बिना झुके या पछताए कि हम दूसरों के कृतज्ञ होते हुए भी अपनी डगर पर चलते रहे हैं, कि हम जरूरत के वक्त काम आए हैं, भले हमें बाद में याद नहीं किया जाता रहा. हमारा समय तुम्हारे से बेहतर या बदतर नहीं ठहरेगा. वो भी अटा पड़ा है प्रेम से, कामना और पिपासा से, अन्याय और क्रोध से, घृणा और बेचैनी से, पर उसी में चमकते सवेरे रहे हैं, और उदास आश्वासन, लंबी न कटने वाली रातें, अनाम चिड़ियां, भरोसे के शब्द, लपकती आकांक्षाएं, मट मैले पर अमिट सच भी. उनमें से उत्तराधिकार में तुम क्या लेना चाहोगे, ये तुम पर है. लेकिन हम रहेंगे तुम्हारे आसपास, अदृश्य समय की तरह, स्वस्थ की तरह, जो शायद तुम्हें किसी भी हालत में निष्प्रभ होने से बचा सके. मेरे पोते, तुम जो ईश्वर की तरह निश्चल, ब्रह्मांड की तरह अप्रत्याशित, सूर्य की तरह नवजात, अग्नि की तरह पवित्र, पृथ्वी की तरह पुरातन हो, मैं तुम्हें इन शब्दों से प्रणाम करता हूँ और उम्मीद करता हूँ कि यही शब्द प्रार्थना के होंगे.
बहुत अच्छा. Thank you so much, Ashok ji. I now request Manju to read out a couple of her poems. Ramesh.
In conversation with Dante's soul, lost in purgatory somewhere, the 7 immortals of poetry now speak with me as a friend. The clamour of the cliques, buzzing of the bees and sunken toys, her own faint senses, tired tongue swallowing an ocean of whiskey. Since when did life become so risky? Thus she swallowed like a singing swallow, till she drowned in the ocean and became a part. This This one is called Lovers and Their Lies. If I could look into your eyes and not see the lies, perhaps I'm in love. You said that thrice. 3 little words that to lovers mean the world, and the third time I knew it better than murmur of prayers. They were there in your eyes. I could read those and not the lies. Liars lie with their eyes, lovers love with their heart. What is so new about it all? Love and deception are the best of friends. Love remains while the lover cheats. In the end, in hell we shall meet. I wear my breast and my bones like it was the best apparel I chose. If there was another form I could be, would I sing a song as an ant looking into another ant's eyes? Only a woman could see lies in her lover's eyes and believe them until love flies.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think you can read another one now. Would you like to read one more? Yeah.
This one is inspired by a TV series called Life by BBC. I'm also a conservationist, so I like to use animal imageries in my poetry, so this is one of my trials with it. Coy as a chameleon, changing hues and blues, she smells the winter air and lets dead flowers blossom in her shoes. The heels stuck to her heart, the tip on her bosom, as she walks proud as a Komodo, ready to pounce the wild buffalo. There are no buffalo soldiers, no singing choruses, just hanging rhythm of leftover music, rattling in empty tin houses and echoing on barren land. Komodo and the dodo, one gone, the other from the Jurassic, scales and fins, flying fish in the ocean. Thoughts pass in and out, a bin inside messy trash of thoughts bought and discarded. Stars are out twinkling. I hear a little song, the same old rhyme. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. We all know the rhyme too well. Why is it that I still wonder why you're a diamond in the sky?
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Manju. I think I have. Do we open up for the audience? Would you like to ask questions? Or if there are no questions, I have one last question for both of you. So, is there anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question? Okay, so I have this, since we're talking about imagination and reality, writing poetry is a kind of running away from reality, which, it is yet rooted in reality and it's running away from reality. So what do you think, in terms of the future of poetry and in terms of, poets will exist for sure, there's no doubt about it, poets will exist. What about the future of poetry? And
When a question like that is asked, it's already positing a shadow that poetry doesn't have much future. And this has happened all along.
In terms of a businessman, I'm a publisher, so in terms of business.
All along this has happened. But let me give you 2 or 3 examples of what happened. I was invited to a Latin American country called Colombia for a poetry in a place called Medellin or something, which is a crime capital of that country. And it has drug addicts and what you have. You can't go into a shop and open, touch a thing that you want. They are all caged. So you have to ask for it. I want a toothpaste and something. Now there I landed up. And we had the inaugural session in a hall which is about 10 times the size of this hall. And we, 5 of us, because a poet from India was going after a very long time, so I was featured also in the inaugural session. And I asked the director, how many seats are there? He said, 1,900. So I said, you will have so much audience? He said, we are short of space. Anyway, 10 minutes before the reading, the hall was, people were standing. Midway, the inaugural readings, I saw the director go down and hustling 4 or 5 poets, taking them out. When he came back, I asked him what happened. He said more than 1,000 people couldn't get space here. So we have arranged an alternative, a simultaneous reading outside. This is one example. The second example is that all too often when there have been great social upheavals. Poets,
So true.
you know, and I don't believe we are going to have a world where social upheavals and political battles would cease. So they will continue to be there. So there is that kind of a need. I went to Assam, which is, in a manner of speaking, neighboring. It's a place called Hajo, which is 35 kilometers from Guwahati. And this is their annual Assam Sahitya Sabha Sammelan. When I landed up, I had never seen a pandal so large in my life.
Lakhs of people.
And there were finally, it turned out that 3.5 lakh people. So, thirdly, we are a
Really shutting me up.
Thirdly, we are a minority. You know, even in this festival, this is the only event relating to poetry. The rest is all other more important things. So we know that we are a marginal tribe, a marginal activity, which gives us both a certain amount of humility and once in a while a degree of arrogance, both together.
So, would you like to say something about the future of poetry? I think we have about a minute to go, right? Yes.
The future of poetry, like Sir said here, it's rather bleak compared to other forms of writing. Even short stories, for that matter, has been waning away. But poetry, as long as life is there, I think there is love for poetry that will exist. But it seems that people are losing faith in poetry. There has to be a revival of poetry to bring it to the mainstream of arts.
Okay. Thank you so much, Manju. Thank you so much, Ashokji. And thank you so much, audience, for being here on this beautiful morning.